pleased to introduce our panelists today who've gathered here from representing all areas of higher education, secondary education in our community, and K through 12. I'm Charmaine Madison, the Chief Information Officer at George Mason University. George Mason is Virginia's largest institution of higher education, public university that is, serving over 40,000 students, over 1,400 full-time faculty, and thousands of staff. We are Virginia's largest public research university by enrollment, and because of our size and proximity to federal agencies, industry, and the Commonwealth, we're often experiencing AI-related issues very quickly and very early. We have policy considerations that we're always navigating through very quickly. We have risk, trust, and accountability challenges that we are often faced with, sometimes ahead of others as well. These decisions affect this region, and they are part of our conversation today. So thank you all for joining us as we begin to talk about the decision layer and the things that we as CIOs have to decide and deal with in this ever-evolving space. So the decisions that we're talking about related to AI have quickly evolved from a technology decision to an institution decision. We're not talking tech. We're talking real thoughts and decisions that will impact enrollment. It will impact our student success. It will impact our ability on our financial side as well. So they shape academic integrity, they shape operational trust, they shape workforce development and readiness, compliance, and the public confidence. As we begin to talk about these things today, I want to first introduce our panelists here today. So, second, I'll start with Sharon, because she's a good friend and colleague, Sharon Pitt. She's the Vice President of Information Technology and Chief Information Officer at Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech serves nearly 39,000 students statewide, and they're supported 2,400 instructional faculty and more than 9,000 staff. So a very large university. As CIO, Sharon leads enterprise technology strategy at one of the Commonwealth's largest and most research-intensive institutions, where technology decisions directly impact teaching, discovery, and public service. The next individual on the panel I want to introduce is Dr. Peter Murray. He joins us as the Senior Vice President of Information Technology and Chief Information Officer at the University of Maryland, Baltimore. The University of Maryland, Baltimore enrolls approximately 6,800 students across 6 professional and graduate schools and has over 7,700 faculty and staff. Peter oversees technology strategy in a highly regulated academic health and research environment where his AI decisions intersect with healthcare, compliance, and public accountability. To my immediate left, I want to introduce Dr. Chad Knights. He's the Chief Academic Officer and Vice President for Academic Affairs at Northern Virginia Community College, one of George Mason's primary feeders into our student enrollment population. Northern Virginia Community College serves more than 56,000 students annually, and they are supported by faculty and staff across 6 campuses, making it the largest community college in the nation. As the Chief Academic Officer, Chad brings an academic leadership lens to AI. He focused on instruction, workforce alignment, and equitable student success at scale. My final panelist and speaker today is Raj Adulsumali. He's the Assistant Superintendent in Information Services of Arlington Public Schools here in Arlington County. Arlington Public Schools, they educate approximately 27,600 K through 12 students and employs thousands of teachers and staff across the district. Raj leads information services for a system where technology decisions are closely tied to public trust, student safety, and instructional quality and community expectations. I want to pause and thank them all for being here today. So let's dive into this. I really want to talk about the current AI landscape. some of the pressures and expectations that we're facing as CIOs and as technology leaders in our different respective areas. Some of this includes the expectations from our faculty, our students. I'll tell you from my perspective as R1 University, we have a lot of expectations from our researchers, our research partners, policymakers like Congressman Byers, and others in the Commonwealth. There's a lot of uneasiness about AI readiness, and so I'd really be curious to know from the panelists, what pressures around AI are you all responding to most urgently right now? Any one of you?
I can kick us off. So I'm going to say one thing first. I'm proud of all of you. When they said governance, you all didn't pack up and walk away, so thanks for sticking in here with us. So my background is a little bit of a nuanced role in that I actually served in capacity of CIO for about the last 5 years before moving and transitioning recently into the CEO role. And the space that we really looked at, sort of at NOVA and across our entire system for community colleges, how do you allow space for creativity and innovation while maintaining and protecting privacy, data, and security? And that isn't necessarily something new for us, right? But the AI tools and the pervasiveness of them within our ecosystem has brought it really to the forefront, I think. And I think the other big piece that has been a focal point for me now, especially transitioning into the new role, is you think about both student learning, but also faculty integration and use of AI. And so we've actually stood up something called mini grants for faculty around assessment in the age of AI, right? Really trying to think about different pedagogy and how you can infuse and leverage AI as a partner in that process, right? Knowing that we're using it, students are using it, and then how do you make the best out of that environment to ensure that learning is happening? And so we're trying to think about that from both the lens of how you manage that from sort of an academic administrative standpoint, but then also from a technology standpoint about how do we then onboard those new technologies that we want our faculty as well as our students to be aware of.
You know, I would say probably the biggest challenge that we face in terms of responding to AI is agility and speed. We have a community that needs to do this. I'll say at Virginia Tech that our research faculty GPU utilization at our institution increased 62% in 2025. And that's a massive increase in utilization of research capability. We've got AI courses in every single one of our colleges helping to build literacy and capability across the institution, and we need a bevy of AI services in order to accomplish that. One of the challenges that I see as well is that when you talk about AI, people think about it as this sort of big behemoth AI thing that's coming at you. But it's really a series of services that we need to provide. What is it that you're trying to accomplish? Do you want to have a conversation? Do you want to ask questions? Do you want to code? Do you want to do analysis? Do you need to do deeper research? All of that requires different kinds of services and different kinds of staffing and different kinds of tools to provision that kind of capability wherever it happens at your institution. We're looking at it from how we use it from an operational administrative perspective. How is it that we do it in research? How do we embrace it in teaching and learning? And we need to have a series of resources in order to be able to accomplish that. In our research space, we opened up an open on demand, and we are doing mostly research with on-prem capability. And 6 months ago, we opened up that an LLM environment for faculty, staff, and students institutionally, for which we have 6 months ago now 2,000 users, and just passed this week 2 billion tokens a day of utilization. So there is a lot of work going on at the institution, and I don't even think that we've begun to touch what it is that will be the demand for us to ensure that we are embracing this tool appropriately within the institution and graduating people who go into industry and utilize these tools appropriately as well.
Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to be with you this afternoon. And as my colleagues have mentioned, CIOs are responding urgently to a set of IT pressures that are all converging. And these AI pressures are not just related to IT, but there are also other institutional risk security, and leadership issues that have to be addressed. And the CIO at many institutions has become the AI steward, where we have to lead the initiatives to cover all the bases. So some of the top pressures that I am dealing with currently are: one, strategic value. Is there a meaningful impact on the missions of the institution? When I get dozens of requests for implementing use cases, how will that use case advance teaching and learning, or research, or clinical care, or community engagement, or administrative efficiency, or student services? We really have to look at that. Is it a strategy, or is it a trend that somebody wants to implement AI because it's a trend to proceed with? Secondly is governance and accountability. It's critically important that we have a structure that gives guidance to the institution. Is there an oversight committee, a steering committee that can provide a path forward, a direction, make key decisions for the institution as a whole? Is there an AI policy that provides expectations and presents what an individual can do, what they're allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do, but doesn't prescribe or prohibit, actually wants to accelerate the use of AI with its opportunities and not restrict it by any means? And also complementary with that are AI procedures that give faculty, staff, students, instructors, clinicians the opportunity to look at how they can use AI effectively and appropriately. In addition, security, data security. It's really important that individuals know the tools that they are using, whether they're protected or whether they have limited protection or they have full protection. So does an employee and a student know if they use an unprotected, unsecured tool, if they put sensitive and confidential information in there, that they are at risk, as well as the potential breach of data at the institutional level? Thirdly is cost. Cost is really important because, and I'm not referring to cost based on licenses, because you can predict and calculate cost based on the license that you acquire. I'm talking about cost of institution-wide AI solutions that require cost based on usage. Does the institution know whether it's going to be the behavior of the individual using the chatbot? Is it a public chatbot? Is it a private chatbot? Is it limited usage, or is it open to the world? In addition to usage, is there an infrastructure cost? Is there a software cost? Is there a cost to get access to data sources that are really needed to fulfill the solution of that chatbot? So those items really have to be presented when you think about readiness to scale. So is there a clear vision and strategy in place? Do you have a governance and accountability structure? Are there approved tools that have guardrails and are recognizing the sensitivity of data? And is there a sustainable cost model that can be monitored and make sure that costs are within the budget for that particular project? And ultimately, where AI really is going to scale, it's going to be the convergence of strategy, governance, cost, security, risk, that all collide. And so the real question that a CIO has to ask is, are we ready to introduce those fundamental elements to the institution? Because once they are adopted and normalized, it's very difficult to change practice.
Good afternoon, everybody. Actually, thank you for the opportunity to be here and sharing my experience. I think the advantage of going last is to say I agree with every one of them. So I do, but actually, let me bring together some perspective from K-12 organizations, because this is a completely different situation where we are dealing with. Obviously, the intensity of the demand was talked about, managing the risk, and the things have been talked about. I think one thing that we actually have here is the teachers, students, and staff are already using them in different pockets at varying degrees of comfort, right? I mean, but there's no norms that have actually been built in. There's no guidance that has been built in. From a teacher point of view, what teachers really thrive and do well is when there is expectations set to say, this is what the tools are, this is what the guidelines are, this is what the boundary is, and then they can actually generate kind of classroom expectations and curriculum that's built around that particular framework. But unfortunately, that's not there. I mean, but they're already using it. If you look at the students, particularly I would actually say the secondary students more than the middle school and the high school students, they're already expecting that AI is built into their framework of the tools that has been given them to actually support their instructional practices. And what are those tools and how are we actually trying to associate them with the teachers is a challenge we're dealing with. And staff, obviously, I'll actually add the fact that the intensity of the demand is growing because everybody thinks that this is a magic bullet that will change efficiencies, that will actually take manual exercise away. Everybody will be saving a lot. But what is it that is really affecting, and what the clarity around what those scenarios are not being ironed out. So it's a huge challenge for us to deal with all of those things, but that's a really basic thing. One thing I will close out by actually saying is, this is different from the various tools that we've adopted in K-12 so far. We've adopted one-to-one devices, we've adopted learning management systems and all these things. But this is a tool that's actually generating content, that's also generating responses and decision-making and the reasoning behind it or something of that sort. But it's actually doing all that without clarity or without transparency into the accuracy of it, without understanding what the detail, like with the intellectual property, the legal aspects of it, how much of that is actually covered. That is not very clear about it. And then the most important one is the student and the staff data privacy, because people don't have clarity around the contextual boundaries that the tools are actually taking in and out is also not clear. So those, with a very small kind of an IT organization not having the same level of manpower that the higher education would actually have, all of the factors of data privacy, risk management, and bridging the institutional trust and the risk is falling on the IT shops. I mean, I think to me, that is really where we're feeling the stress and the pressure in adopting AI at this point of time. I want to stop there.
No, thank you all so much for that information, that insight. I want to shift the conversation from the pressure, which you've heard is quite a bit, it's quite intense, to the actual decision-making. This could turn into tech sprawl very quickly because, as you all know, that there's a lot of vendors that have sprung up bringing forth AI capabilities to address and solve some of these challenges that we've mentioned. So I want to ask my group here, my panel, how they make the decision to act, or is it safer to delay? What is your approach to dealing with the onslaught of constant barrage of new tools and new technology as you try to navigate those pressures?
Yeah, and we don't see that speed slowing down at all. I mean, the existing tools get better by the day. What you tried last month, you're going to be doing something incredibly different this month as you utilize that capability. Our vendors are looking at how it is that they incorporate AI within the existing tools, and you have to have governance strategies around that. I will say that an incredibly strong governance strategy is something that's very much needed. And as much as possible, I think we want to democratize that decision-making. We have an AI working group within our IT governance structure within the institution, and that is, it's a toss-up as to whether it's the AI working group that's doing more work or the risk group that's doing more work, and sometimes they work in tandem with each other based on, hey, what if a question comes up about people are bringing their own AI chat translators into meetings? Are you going to do that or you're not going to do that? And literally something like that comes up every single day. So having a strong governance capability, and I feel like we have that at the institution, really helps us make those security decisions, have those conversations from an academic perspective about what you're going to use and what you're not going to use within the space. And we have faculty and business leaders and students engaged in that conversation to make sure that we're making the best decision possible. From an investment perspective, I think we all know Not only are we struggling with this, vendors are struggling with this as to how that looks, and that changes from a daily perspective as well. We did mid-year budget investment last year in what we call a catch-up strategy on AI, and we're putting together a small team to understand. Virginia Tech has this wonderful strategic plan called Beyond Boundaries, and it's a 30-year plan. But what our president has recently said is that we need something for the next 6 months, the next 16 months, the next 24 months, because you see the students that are out here talking about how it is that they use AI. Those students are coming to our institutions, and we need to be able to embrace them, help them critically think, utilize AI for their domain expertise, and then again, go out into the world with capabilities where they are contributing in this kind of environment. So we've got to have curricular strategies, we've got to have financial strategies. I would say that I don't like to think about AI as a threat, but it feels like half the conversations that I walk into, it immediately becomes, they're robots in dark places producing things, and let's think about the positive possibilities of what can happen here in terms of how we think about this strategically and how we invest institutionally. AI, I think, has to be embraced by education broadly in order for us to really survive as institutions. It's something that we have to figure out how it is that we accommodate and engage people in making these decisions.
So I'd like to follow up on what Sharon said about governance and democratizing decision-making. I think there's excellent points. So when, about 4 or 5 years ago, when ChatGPT, generative AI, hit the wavelengths and the rage of everybody to experiment and try it and get a free version and then ultimately a paid version, there was no way an institution could implement governance anywhere, any fast to meet up with that speed. So what we had to do, quite frankly, as an institution is figure out, okay, how do we implement some key elements of governance to not catch up, but at least address the speed such that AI doesn't become so fragmented across the institution, have so many inconsistent practices. So what we did is a strategy. We did this MVP governance strategy, minimum viable product governance, where we figured out what should we do first and fast. The first thing we did is create a steering committee. And the steering committee was really comprised of some key individuals across the university, and it gave the institution some comfort that we were addressing AI. We were trying to be involved. Secondly, I mentioned policy. It gave people the opportunity to know how to make the right decision with policy. It informed what they should do or should not to do. But we wanted them to proceed. We didn't want to slow them down. And of course, procedures gave them the opportunity to do things appropriately and efficiently. In addition, 2 other key things. One is we had an AI literacy program to inform individuals, employees and students, as to what tools to use for what types of data, to not expose any sensitive data in a tool that was publicly available that could be exposed to the world. We had to do that. And the last thing we did, we created 6 task forces to engage intentionally with the university community. We wanted people from the grassroots to be involved. And so for these 6 task forces, for research, education, clinical care, community engagement, administrative efficiency, and student services, we sent out a communication that said, anybody who wants to apply to serve on these task forces, please apply. We had over 500 applicants to apply for these task forces, of which about 10 to 12 people served on each. And they were different roles, different levels of the institutions. But they had the opportunity to create 2 to 3 use cases, each task force, 2 to 3 use cases. And they had 3 months to do that. And so they felt empowered across the university to at least have some say as to what AI would be doing at the institution. We have those use cases now, and we're starting to implement them. And that has gone over quite well across the university.
Sure. Let me bring in a different perspective, actually, from K-12. I think I agree with whatever is being said. 2 more things that I would actually add on. One would be, we trying to be intentional in anchoring what we want to do in a use case than actually in a tool. Because I think the more clarity we actually have in defining the use case as to the ownership of it, the decision making of it, the process and the premise of the problem, actually the more clarity we have, the easier and the better solutions to success we would actually have in adopting that. I think we've attempted to do that, because I think it was very important for us to do that. We needed to act. I think in today's day, I would summarize this to say the cost of not acting, of acting fast is there. There's a huge cost you'll pay for it. But there's also a cost of not acting too slow also, which is equally costly in today's day and world that we're dealing with. So to balance it out, I think that is where we're saying is anchor it in a very strong use case. And we've actually come up with a couple of scenarios, particularly around advisory services to students, like what type of courses do you actually think that they would be successful in, that they would actually really thrive in, knowing all of the history and the background that they have achieved and all of the results we've had. We've done a work case with George Mason team actually to do that. But at the end of the day, the most important thing is making sure that these experimentations are reversible, in the sense at the end of the day, it is only making a recommendation, but there is still a decision-making process that is actually with the person who actually has the institutional expertise in it and is using the institutional common sense and the personal common sense as a decision-making tool at the end of it, and then making the final decision. I think being intentional about that has been how we've adopted some of the projects that we've moved forward with AI adoption.
That's great. Did you have anything to add, Chad?
Yeah, no, again, I love going last because I can just echo the sentiments of my colleagues. I think one of the things that we've done, so again, when you think of resource constraints and scale and size, NOVA, we enroll 1/3 of the system's community college students, right? And we are part of a system in that structure and how we manage and organize the technology that we have access to. And so you can really think of the technology space that we work in, and we laid it out, right? You have enterprise solutions that go through a very rigorous process. You have de novo solutions, though, that are really being targeted at the end user. And then you also have the integration of AI into tools you've already done evaluation on. And so we kind of broke it into those three buckets as we think about how we approach this. Can we qualify by risk? The risk is on the end user targeted solutions. And so we ran through and did really an assessment to see what our stakeholders were using, right, without any repercussions, just let us know what you're using. And then identified to try and evaluate where our users were in their AI fluency or comfort level. And all the while we're doing this, we're reinforcing the golden rule. You do not share PII in these kind of tools and sources. Because at the end of the day, even if we have a governance structure, you'll have people who won't be aware of that and will see this as an asset to their work or their students or their purpose, and will try to use it maybe perhaps before going through that governance structure. We don't want them to do that. We expect that it might happen. So one of the things that we did is we introduced a model where we are lucky to be both a Microsoft and a Google shop. So we have access to Gemini, Notebook LM, as well as Copilot Chat, just through service licenses across the system. And in doing so, we ran webinars to talk through and demonstrate how you would leverage and use these tools. And what we found is that we have such a broad knowledge base on use. We have some that didn't even know where to find the tool and how to log in. And we had some who were asking us how to create agents and how do they get access to tokens, right? And so when you have that kind of dichotomy in terms of your service, the group that you're trying to serve, for us, it became more about resource development and thinking about that across the system for those different levels of users to try to make sure we were covering all the bases in terms of how we can build up a foundation of comfortable, responsible, ethical use within the college. And I think stemming from that, we also then scaled into one additional use case where we did run a pilot on this, where we had Copilot licenses, right, for Copilot 365, that we actually identified what we would consider some of the power users, right, and invited them in to use the licenses and leverage that in their everyday work to identify and see, one, how often would they use it, what were the use cases, and to build a community of practice around that they could share with others. And what we found is that just giving access wasn't enough, right, because everybody has their own way that they do things, and unless you have, it actually is a learning, right, it's a learning process to step into an AI tool like that to try to think about how you become more efficient. And so we had to be more intentional around the types of engagements we were having with our staff staff and faculty stakeholders in that space to really demonstrate them use cases. And I'll just share my own personal anecdotal piece with this. I was sitting there struggling through spreadsheets with several hundred lines of data that was repeated for some reason within my form, and I had to go through and repeat it. It was taking me about 20 minutes a spreadsheet to do this rote, like, manual work. And a colleague playing in the background in a webinar talking about emerging technology and AI and how people are using it in the workforce. And it said some people, I heard it, Richard Lipson, she said some people don't even realize what they can do and it's right in front of them. And I like hit myself in the forehead because I have Copilot in Excel. I jumped in there, it took me 10 minutes to sort through it, build a use case for how to do that, verify that my tool was actually working, and it saved me easily 2 hours of redundant work that I needed in that moment without any help. And so I share that only to say we have people that I think would excel in this, but we have to find a way to empower them to take that time to actually learn and leverage and use the tool to build those kinds of efficiencies. And so that's a piece that we're trying to frame ourselves in terms of the pilots that we're trying to spin up at the college. Thanks.
No, that's great. I want us to pivot because I want to make sure there's time for questions if you all have any, and do somewhat of a lightning round as we wrap up. Let's talk about the future. I'd like to hear, and you guys at any point just randomly chime in, what's one AI decision that every CIO or academic technology leader should be preparing to make in the next 12 months?
So I'm going to repeat myself a little bit, but I think it's so important. Over the next 12 months, you have to develop a governance policy that is communicated, it is widespread, people are adopting it, people understand it. Not just do you have it, but people understand it, the culture is adopting the governance structure that you have in place. It's really important. And key elements of that governance structure that I would highlight, again, there's the AI literacy. How to use a tool, when to use a tool, what kind of data for that particular tool should be used is critically important. Because one decision that we had to make early on is, with the proliferation of tools, individuals didn't really truly understand initially, they do now, didn't understand initially when and how to use that tool, which is critically important. Secondly, again, the cost element. We really need to figure out cost of what we do, return on investment, return on value. When you look at what you've done over the last year, did that truly advance the mission of the institution? Did it truly accomplish that? And lastly, the governance really has to be in place such that when everybody adopts it, you have consistency. You have people working together across the institution. You don't have fragmentation, and you don't have inconsistent processes. But that's one of the things we're going to work on over the coming year.
Yeah, I'll actually add a people aspect to it because I think we can go on talking about technology and the things associated with that, but we should never forget the fact that particularly in organizations like K-12 and other older organizations, there is always that question about who owns a decision at any point of time. Who owns it and what is the process behind it, and the lack of clarity and the lack of ownership of very, very key important processes is very, very important to be addressed. Because if you don't have that clarity, it is going to be a failure because who's going to manage that decision at the end of the day? Like, who's going to be accountable for the tool actually making a decision and verify that the decision-making process is actually in line? So obviously, I think as CIOs or as the leads of technology in K-12 organization, one thing I'm actually feeling that I think we need to challenge and we need to be prepared to talk is every corner in every business, that every test case or everything that's coming forward with adoption, we need to be standing strong and asking for clarity on those things and being very sure that they are defined, they're very clear boundaries, they're very clear definitions as to who the owners are, and then ownership and accountability is adopted before you actually take the next step of bringing that tool in. And those are very hard decisions and very hard conversations in organizations. And I feel like the next 12 months, I think that is where we would really be engaged in from my point of view.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Yeah, so I think one of the things that I have, so coming from the community college space, one of the things that we feel is a gap. There's a gap growing between the access and the resources and the utilization of students, faculty in our space. And as many of our students become university students, it's our job to help make sure we close that gap. that we find ways to gain sort of an equity in that access utilization. And one big piece for us is trying to identify how we can bring in a tool or a solution similar to what some of our other, I'd say, states have done sort of on a large scale level to give access broadly to tools. And I think for us, we had originally approached this from trying to use a single vendor to think about bringing in a large enterprise version of a private LLM to then leverage that across our college, but then try to help it leverage it across our entire system. But dealing with state legislation and policy makes one tool a bit of a challenge, and I think a decision we'll have to make at a very technical level is whether or not we want to go to a brokered managed model that allows us to bring in multi-vendors, as well as thinking about what partnerships we can have with our university brethren in terms of thinking about how we can both accomplish that access question, but then also leverage some of those resources and almost like a shared model in terms of how we execute. And so I think those are some of the questions that spin with me in terms of how we provide that access to students who otherwise may not have the paid version or the latest version in terms of how we're trying to teach this and imbibe it into our curriculum.
You know, and I would say that we're making progress in a lot of areas, be it governance, reviewing our institutional policies, making progress on literacy, making progress on the adoption of AI in domain areas across the institution, even making progress on the variety of tools that are needed to support that capability. That said, we need to fully understand our gaps in services, whether that's tools, or whether that's the people who help to support the utilization of those tools, and the funding that we need to support that appropriately at the institution. We don't want to undemocratize AI by suddenly making it something that's a cost, that's expensive for certain students at the university or even for our staff. There's another aspect of this that I think is challenging as well. We've got a lot of bubbles of activity, and I suspect that many of you have that as well, of people who are adopting this in different ways. You talked about that a little bit. But again, we want to lift the entire institution in terms of how it is that we utilize these capabilities. It is hard for people to understand what to do, especially our institutional leaders, if we don't have a communication framework for how it is that our leadership understands what is happening now, what's in the space, and how it is that we move forward. Leaders are really struggling because they don't know how to use these tools themselves. So it's very hard for them to make decisions about how it is that we move forward. And it's imperative of technologists and others to help leadership understand so that we can make the best strategic decisions possible.
Thank you all. I'd like to jump in on this lightning round and offer that I would offer that other CIOs and technical leaders in this space think about partnership. These are tough decisions to make. And I think if you're really thinking about the student experience, whether it's from K through 12 community college or at one of these other universities, you want that experience to be one that is cohesive. So it's important to me to partner with Raj and with others to understand what they're providing and delivering and engaging and how they're leveraging AI in their spaces, because those students will one day be my students. And I want to be able to not only meet those expectations, but exceed them so that when they leave George Mason or when they leave any other institution of higher education, that they're equipped and prepared to go out into the workforce and be successful, to be viable candidates for our employers in the workforce right back here in this area. So for me, it's partnerships, whether it's partnership with my peers here or a partnership with industry, or partnership with lawmakers. We have to partner, and I think the more we lean in on that space, the more successful we'll be in truly delivering that cohesive student experience and success. I'd like to offer that we open up to questions and answer. I think the QR code's been placed. The QR code's been placed on the screen and on the board
Can
for
we
us
just If there's a microphone near someone.
Yeah, I can certainly give up my mic.
Oh. I'm just curious. A lot of AI vendors want you to send their data to their cloud. Are you all having issues with that?
So one, like we do with any kind of negotiation with any of our vendors, that kind of information should be in the contract. What it is that one uses with the data for, doesn't use the data for. One of our elements is about data sovereignty. So the challenge that we have is more trying to ensure that our researchers are not going out to ChatGPT, putting their proprietary National Science Foundation proposal in there and helping other people to be able to respond. So part of what the service that we provision needs to be are those environments where high-risk data can be used, where when we're working with the Department of Defense, we have CMMC 2.0 capabilities that even when our students are preparing things that they're able to do something in the environment, and several of us, I think, have a Nebula One capability where we have a place where our students, our faculty, and our staff can go in and utilize those tools and be able to put proprietary information in that environment and not be worried that their information is being used to train an LLM publicly. There's a place for that public use, but it's not necessarily in the teaching space. It's certainly not in the research space. Sorry, does anybody else want to answer?
Yeah. So that question is a great question. It really resonates with me because I'm at a place that has a hospital, medical facilities, clinics, all kinds of patient-protected health information, so on and so forth. So it pertains and is relevant to AI for sure, but it's also for all other kinds of stuff, data that we put in the cloud. And so it's critical that we have in the contract all the compliance documents we need, as well as business associate agreements that actually put the liability on the vendor if there's any kind of issue with the data in their cloud infrastructure. But it's a great question.
And to your point, Charmaine, this is where our general counsels are partners in this process.
Absolutely.
I would say from sort of in the non-research space too, short answer is yes. This is a challenge for us. Also in a system mindset, we don't necessarily own all the contracts and the language that we build in how we structure those data use agreements, especially in the tools, because we haven't necessarily gone out and got new tools per se. It's when you see a tool that's produced by a provider that has now integrated that in and is now a built-in or an addendum or an amendment into the use agreement of how we had previously assigned and used that data. And I think that's where it gets a bit challenging. And I would say there is also a hesitancy to even rely on that, right? To even rely on the legality or the liability of the owner in a breach in terms of how you then manage, which is one of the reasons we had just actually gone for our own hosted private LLM, which is one of the reasons that I brought up the piece about the context of trying to use one of those brokered models so that we would have better oversight and management of our data. We don't necessarily have scale of resources to be throwing at these types of agreements to make sure that we're legally necessary compliant, even though, to be clear, we work with the Assistant Attorney Generals as a state entity. They're great. They work with us. It's a beautiful relationship. But I think partnering where you know you have some better control over that data is one of the pieces that we had stepped into to try and reduce our bureaucracy in trying to deal with some of those questions.
Yeah, can I just add one small thing? I think we are as strong as our weakest link. I think that realistically, I think it really boils down to, particularly in K-12, we needed to educate all of the teachers about the actual use, because there's naivety in actually trying to say this is a great educational tool, but there's actually expectation that you share some information not knowing the premise on the limitation of that one. So we created an AI course that was actually developed that talks about the tools and also the limitations of what the data should actually be treated as, and then kind of talking about the risks associated with that. And that's been something that's been pushed to all of the teachers as a requirement over the next 1 year, and they've actually given separate time, dedicated time for them to go through that course as part of the PD cycles. So it was very important to do that.
Thank you all. This is great, really. And governance is not boring. It's very important. But going to that precisely, because it's a very complex system, and this is a very specialized area of your whole institutional work. So then there are challenges in terms of coming up to an effective governance systems and sort of mixing this vertical, organizational line with the more flat dynamic and processes, isn't it? We're talking about organizational design processes to a very specific tool that is very impactful. And impactful in terms of the whole decision-making process, and impactful in terms of the data. So I won't ask more about that because you already did it well. So the thing is, because it comes to a lot of security, sensitive data, proprietary data. So my question is, how do you work all the integration to get to a good governance system that probably will be always in the works? But how do you do it? And then how do you protect the data? I just want to understand it in your responses to the data issue. If you were talking about sort of closed, curated AI systems for the sensitive sort of proprietary data, and open ones sort of cohabitating or something like that. I just wanted to understand if that's where you were going about that too. Thank you.
Is this on? Yes. So the key thing from an institutional perspective is have a framework that has a governance structure for the institution as a whole in that framework. However, underneath that framework, there's got to be lots of local autonomy to use tools that the individual faculty or student has available to them and that have been approved by the institution. With respect to tools that have protection, we have there's a suite of tools that have been approved by the institution for official use, so to speak. And a tool like Microsoft Copilot has full protection that all the data stays within the enterprise of the institution. It's protected just like any other data we use at the university. There are other tools that we do not have enterprise-wide agreements with, but we have an enterprise agreement, but we don't have the BAA or other compliance documents, so it has limited protection. And then there's other tools, many other tools, that are available for individuals to use that have to just really be public data that's not going to be internally private or confidential or sensitive. So it's a gamut of education, AI literacy, with a framework offered to the institution and to individuals, and from there, they can go forward and use whatever they need to use for their work, if that makes sense.
I did want to say one thing, because there was an article that came out yesterday, I believe, in the New York Times from a special advisor to the president of Vanderbilt University, who is a cybersecurity expert, that, and I'd say try to figure out how to get a gift article or utilize your access to figure that out. It's this imperative that we understand that we need to do things like secure systems. We need to have great endpoint management. We need to be thinking about contracts. We've always tried to think about these things, but we really, really need to think about them now. And one element of this is how it is that we as individuals deal with the protection of our own information, which is, have a different password for every system. Yes, embrace two-factor authentication, and I think the whole mythos element is an aspect of this around, you talk about what it is that you know you should be doing, you really need to do it now. So to the question, there are so many strategies that we can use to protect data, but the weakest link falls on us as individuals around reporting of things that we think are inappropriate and really trying to protect our own information in an environment that's quite challenging. I'll also say, while we're doing all of these things, we also need to be thinking about what this means for the future in terms of how it is that we protect information. One aspect of this is that we have identity and access management at all of our institutions. We're struggling as research institutions to figure out how it is we provide identity and access management to non-human entities, AI agents. because we want to know when we want an agent to go into a space and when we don't want an agent to go into a space, and that brings identity and access management to an entirely different level around how it is that we respond to these kinds of challenges. So we're all struggling with this, and I think every day something new sorts of happens that makes us need to think about this in new ways. And frankly, new capabilities on our security teams for how it is that we figure out those kinds of challenges. I don't know if that got to what you were asking, but totally. Artificial intelligence is human intelligence, and AI will exacerbate bad processes and help others.
Yep.
So I'm gonna inject here because there's quite a queue of other questions for us to take a stab at, and I want to try and get to some of those. So I have a question that says they would be curious to hear how the panelists are addressing AI impacting their workforce at the university, more geared towards administrative staff. Have they started talking to HR and started making strategic decisions or plans around long-term planning, around talent strategies and hiring decisions? Anyone?
As a matter of fact, I was talking with our VP of HR yesterday. We're looking at literacy aspects around our personnel. How it is that we can give them tools and try new things, how it is that you might work with an AI agent in a team. Every time we have a position vacancy, we're not asking questions about how it is that AI might be a component of that or not a component of that. You know, if you're like us, you're struggling with how it is that you hire people, and bringing people to your institution. If we can embrace AI and help our workforce to be more effective, if we can think about an AI agent as an element of a team, then we are beginning to address some of those workforce challenges in terms of not being able to get staff. There are key areas in IT where this is a challenge. And then how is it that we retrain people in terms of how it is that this work is done?
Yeah, I think that's a really key question about workforce development. And what we've tried to do, and we need to continue to do it, is to be intentional with engaging current employees. So for example, what we've done, we've had a series of what we call prompt-a-thons. We had a couple of last year, we're having another couple this year, and they're just sessions, right? The first session we have is, what is AI? Basic AI, introducing employees to what it is, how to use it, what the tools are available. The second session focuses on effective prompting. How do you prompt effectively to get the desired results? And the third session we're teaching is how to build agents. What do agents do? How can you develop them? So we'll continue to do that. We also have some workshops available as we go around the campus to engage the workforce so we can answer their questions, we can help them get acclimated to AI, and help them use it so it becomes a personalization tool where they hopefully can move from transactional raw materials to a higher level of thinking. They can get output and responsibly use that output with some critical thinking skills to make their jobs easier and better, hopefully.
Great. There's another question that's in the chat about decentralized organizations. There will be local AI innovations in some departments. At the same time, there's a global IT governance. How can these two entities partner effectively to ensure that they are meeting the middle of the local entity not being slapped at the end with unexpected asks from a governance point of view?
I could take a shot at it with an understanding that the schools are all distributed and there's a lot of innovation happening in each of the schools. They adopt their own tools depending upon each teacher has a perspective and the school has one as well. So I think the model is never a centralized one or a distributed one. It is actually a hybrid one. I think that has been the most effective governance model that we feel is actually created, where the centralized ones are all talking about the bigger picture items like the safety, security, the data privacy and protection, and the contextual constraints that we should actually be operating in. And that's it. And we are stepping back from that point of view and actually leaving certain kind of tested, safe zones or safe areas or platforms for them to adopt. And then there's also coaches in the schools that actually then take these platforms and train them and coach the teachers in the schools, and then with the collaboration of their feedback, adopt a local kind of a strategy of which tool to use and which contextual curriculum they should be using it in, and then build it into their framework. So the usage of the day-to-day, the guidance around that is actually at the school level, but the main criteria of the lenses of safety, security, and protection are coming from central. That's what I would actually offer from my.
I'll say that our IT governance structure is shared governance. So we have as many distributed folks engaged in that decision making as we have central folks, so that we come up with the right answer to these kinds of challenges that we're facing.
I would share briefly, similar to that, I think it is a bit of I will only speak from some of the cyber and like CISOs that I've had like the pleasure of working with. It was very cut and dry before, right? You could or you could not, right? And it is a changed environment now where we have had to find a little bit more grace in that decision-making process as we go through this, is to not, two things. One, you don't want them working around your process. You want them working through your process, which means they have to trust it, right? And I think that's a big piece of this, is getting the stakeholders involved, having that distributed model where you bring in those different voices to hear the different use cases and approaches and the applications of why you need it. So it's really about how can we make this possible for you, instead of no, this can't happen. And so I think it's a bit of a mindset shift too in thinking about how that governance processes work, where you put in a submission for a software, it goes into the abyss and it comes back a yes or no. At least that's been our experience. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll take one last final question. Does a Virginia Higher Ed Joint Procurement Consortium solve the ownership and cost problems that you will each have named? Or does pooling sovereignty just relocate the accountability gap? Who sits in the governance seats if you build it? Maybe a full ownership from owning hardware to models to deployment might work. What are your thoughts?
So are we talking about VASCA? So this is the procurement group. So how it is that we can help engage in those processes is that as we negotiate those contracts, we try to make those contracts available to all folks in Virginia as they're negotiated. But I'll have to say, that process is really slow, and we started this conversation out with the need for agility and speed around process, and procurement is a highly defined process. So I think we're going to have to partner to try to figure out ways that we make that faster and address those kinds of challenges.
Great point.
So I'll just say, I hope it does work, because if it works in Virginia, we'll borrow it and use it in Maryland. How's that?
My tact on this one is a little bit different. So yes, I think that can be a vehicle for that level of collaboration, but I think we as higher education institutions in the state have to organize ourselves in such a way to make that happen, right? And there's models out there where that's happened. You look at New York, you look at California, they've had multi-million-dollar investments from their legislation into the use of AI in higher education, right? So for us, there's lots of issues, but cost is certainly an issue for us within a community college space. Without having a research backbone, we don't have that level of grant investment to be able to put this into place. And so thinking about what those larger investment strategies look like from almost like a consortium standpoint, right? I think that is a solution we'd love to see and we're trying to think about how we can move something like that forward with university partners, with the Virginia Community College system, to really make what is a single ask of our state in terms of how, and also partners, to be clear, right? In California, it's a technology partner that made one of the larger contributions into that space, right? So thinking about how we can drive up that kind of investment in our students, in our workforce here in Northern Virginia, right? The DMV connected, right? I think that's an important piece of the answer to that question.
Did you have anything else?
She's been dying to ask a question for.
All right, so let's introduce myself. My name is Lamia. I'm a candidate of George Mason, the Chief Data and AI Officer. So I am your AI officer for the future. So I heard today that you're talking about governance, you're talking about ROI, you're talking about looking at ROARs, you talked about ownership. So and I heard also you're talking about capabilities and tools, considering AI as a tool. What I would like you to think with me in the future of operationalize the AI as part of your operational model for an enterprise for growth. Even though it is an educational institute, it's a hospital, we are targeting students, but AI will become part of the whole operational model. What would be the failure factors that will stop us from envisioning that success?
I don't think there are factors that will stop it. I truly believe that AI is a socio-technical phenomenon. It's not just a tool. And I believe truly that it will become, within the next few years, in the fabric of all of our operations, our applications, our systems, everything we do within every single mission area of the institution. It, quite frankly, in my opinion, will be part of our culture. And in fact, 3 years from now, we may not even be talking about AI. There's going to be some other innovation. I just think it's here to stay, and it's going to be in the fabric, like you mentioned, of our institutions.
If there's anything that creates a giant challenge, it'll be if we don't think about our humanity and how it is that we embrace this capability.
Thank you so much for your question and for your time today. I'd like to thank our panelists for your leadership and your candor and the important conversation that we've had today. The one takeaway I'd offer you all as we depart is that AI leadership isn't about certainty, it's about judgment, and it's about timing, and it's about trust. So thank you all so much for your time today, and once again, thanks to this great panel.